Hi, Big Ben with BTS Photography, bringing you another exciting post-production tutorial. Today we're going to be going in some of my workflow and how I edit my images. The purpose of this is more to talk about theories and workflow rather than individual settings. I'm usually very hesitant to do Photoshop or Lightroom tutorials because a lot of people, what they do is, instead of learning the concept and the theory behind of what I'm doing, they merely are going to come in and copy the numbers, the exact numbers that I punch in here, do it to their photos, and they're not learning what they are or how to use them, or they just want to get the photos to look like mine. And so normally I'm really hesitant to do this, but a lot of you have asked for it. I've had a lot of emails, a lot of comments in the sections of my videos, and so I am going to be going through this. But mind you, I want you to understand the concept that's going on here, the theory behind the workflow, rather than just punching in the numbers, because, you know, I want your photos to look like your photos, not my photos. You know, I definitely encourage you to create something better. I'd rather see you take these theories and concepts and apply them and create photos that blow mine out of the water. You know, I'm a pretty non-competitive guy. You know, if someone wants to do what I'm doing, that's fine. But I'd rather just have you learn the concepts. So I'm starting this in the middle of my edit. My photos have been imported into Lightroom. I'm currently working in Lightroom 4 during the beta test right now. I've been very happy with it. I've only crashed it a few times and found a few little bugs, which I'm sure Adobe will even out here before its initial release. Pardon me. The biggest thing that I've noticed, the biggest difference that I have seen with the Lightroom 4 is that within, instead of just having your normal and your basic panel here, what they've done is, instead of just having a brightness and contrast sliders here, they've actually added to where we have better control over our histogram and images. They've added where we can go in and tweak the highlights, the whites, the highlights, exposure, the shadows, and the black. So now we have greater control of our histogram, and we can better control each area in their tonal values from being overexposed to underexposed. And so this does a lot now, and they've gotten rid of the fill slider as well as the recovery slider. And this is what they've put in place. When I first started testing this and using it in my workflow, it was kind of hard to get used to, because I am used to using fill, recovery, and brightness. But now with this coming in and the implementation of this, I think the control that you have here is amazing. And so I'm really glad they did this, and I hope they keep it. So let's jump in here. And this was a family of a mother and her 3 daughters, and they wanted some kind of fashionable but contemporary portraits in an urban setting. They are really fun to work with, and instead of the whole, you know, posing in a box store in front of a white background, they wanted something more fun with a lot of candid shots and almost an editorial approach. So what we did on this, we started out in the streets. The wind was blowing hard this day. It was probably about 25 to 30 degrees with the wind chill. So we are going to have some hairs flying around. We're going to have some red faces, some red cheeks from the wind. So I'm going to show you how we get rid of that, as well as my basic workflow of bouncing back and forth in between Lightroom. So you can see these were the first sets of images that I've done. These are the edits. And I've been pretty happy with them. Kind of gave them my branding or my style of editing, which is a little bit of a lomography curve, a little bit of a kind of crushing the blacks a little bit, having some fun with that. And so these turned out really well, but if you notice, our first problem is that I'm shooting here in this alley, and this photo came out well, my white balance was fine, but then I ended up moving to my second location, which is an alley around the corner, and it being windy and cloudy and sunny and kind of a mixed open shade condition, I completely botched my white balance here. If you look at this second location I was at, I forgot to change my white balance, so all these images are a little bit too warm for my taste. And again, all this is for my taste. I usually like to butt my photos to the warm side if I'm shooting kids or kind of a warm family portrait with a grandmother and you know, the patriarch of the family and stuff like that. We'll we'll go ahead and keep them that way. But with this, I kind of want that fashionable tone. I want that urban fashion that's been consistent with my branding and my style. And so these ended up just being a little bit too warm. And, you know, I shot them at, you know, it came through at 5,000 Kelvin here, but it's just a little bit too warm. So let's jump into this right now, and we'll start going into it. So when I work in Lightroom, I always start at the top and work my way down. I think the way they've laid out the panels here in the develop module is amazing. I wouldn't switch them around any other way, and it's very simple. So the first thing I do, since my histogram reads everything in the image, it samples everything, I'm going to go ahead and crop the image to where I want it to be. With this image, I actually shot it with more space on top because, as you know, most our DSLR cameras shoot in a 2:3 format, and I wanted this to be an 8:10 when I shot it, so I went ahead and left extra room so I can go ahead and crop that to a 4:5 ratio, which is an 8:10, 16:20, etc. So I'm going to go through here and kind of figure out what I want. I'm paying attention to the navigator panel on the upper left of the screen, kind of just seeing where I want it. That looks great. And this is just kind of a candid, so I'm not going to do too much to it. Let's see here. You know, we'll jump over to this one. This is a little bit more of a keeper photo that we'd want to work with right here. And this one, they're definitely too red. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to start at the top. Going to go ahead and crop it to where I want it. I really like the crop of this. I like the room of it. I could keep this in the standard 4:3 and pull it in a little bit, or I can go ahead and crop it to an 8:10. You know, keep in mind what your clients are buying and what they want. A lot of people are buying 8:10s. It's a nice wall size that a lot of people are getting. The cost isn't too much on them, and so I shoot a lot of my images in 8:10 format. So you notice when I crop this, I'm not going to put them in the center of the image. I kind of want to tuck them off to one side. Now, a common mistake that most amateur photographers do, they always shoot whatever their subject is, they put it right in the middle of the frame. We call it bullseyeing, and the important thing is to adhere to the rule of thirds, you know, kind of experiment with some different ways. So they're mostly in the middle, but I'm going to tuck them just a little bit to the side. So I've got my crop right, and I'm looking at my histogram. I'm always paying attention to this histogram. This is your, in a sense, this is your go-to. This is your dictionary, your Bible, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to head down to my white balance, and I'm going to start playing with that and getting this so my skin tones are going to be neutral or where I want them. The key thing is to really pay attention to the skin tones when it comes to shooting people. If you get it wrong in the camera, which I kind of did here, the big key thing is if there's anything you want to get right as far as color temperature, you want to get the skin right. You know, don't worry about the wall, don't worry about the background, don't worry about the clothes. But if you have to save an image, go ahead and bounce off the skin. So I'm going to go ahead and crank this down to where their skin's a little bit more neutral for me. And I don't want to go to where their lips are blue, but for me, that's about 4,300. Is about where I want it. You can see they got a little bit of redness in their cheeks, and we're going to go ahead and take that out. Exposure looks pretty good. My histogram's right down the middle. I nailed this exposure pretty well. But just for sakes, I'm going to bump it up just a little bit. And that's one thing. If you're taking images and you're bumping it over a stop or two or more than... For me, my rule is on my personal goal is that if I'm adjusting my exposure slider by plus or minus about 30, I botch that exposure. I ruin that frame. It's not even going to be a keeper for me. You know, that's part of the thing of not adhering to the digital crutch of Lightroom and Photoshop, but getting it right in the camera. And so I try not to go above, you know, 0.30 plus or minus. And sometimes I'll go up to about a half, but it's very rare. In fact, this one needs very little. I'm going to go ahead and key the keyboard and do about 0.15. Now to these new sliders down here that have been a headache and a pleasure and a love at the same time. I just start at the top. I'm going to look at my highlights. And if you notice, if you don't want to drag the individual sliders down here, you can go up to your histogram. And just like you used to have your exposure, your recovery, and your blacks, now they've divided all 5 of these controls up here. And I like dragging them up here more than down here because I'm more paying attention to my grid than I am the individual integers or values down here. So I'm going to go ahead to my highlights. I'm going to pull them up just a little bit to give it a little bit of contrast. I'm going to go ahead to my blacks, and I'm one of those. I like my blacks is barely kissing or touching the end of my histogram. So if I go in here and see, I go over to my clipping, and I don't mind if the shadows are barely clipping. It's kind of what I'm looking for. Now I'll go to one of the new sliders here, which is the shadows, and this almost works like the fill slider used to, I've noticed. And I like this because, like, if you got someone with dark hair and it's kind of muddy, or you got like they're wearing a dark suit or a dark coat, and you're losing some of those, you want to contrast the image, but you're losing a lot of those lower values, those darker tones. You can go ahead and bump up these shadows a little bit, which I'm doing here. And if you notice, and this daughter's hair as well as the coats, it's actually pulling that up a little bit. So I'll go ahead and reset that so you can see the difference. So I like this, but we're losing a little bit of the strands of her hair there, so I'm just going to slowly walk it up. Just like that. It looks pretty good. And my whites are pretty good. I mean, I really don't want to turn them up and blow them out. I think their skin tones are getting where I want them to be. And I certainly don't want this white paint on the wall to be too distracting. Remember, our human eye sees, we see luminance before we ever see color. And so when we look at something, the eye's going to go from high contrast to low contrast before it ever even looks at a color. So whenever we edit your images or even shoot images, you know, you shoot your photos, for example, pay attention to the contrast in the image because we see light to dark, bright color to low color. So anything with a higher value, that's going to go. And, you know, when I look at this image, I'm almost distracted by this over here. But with the contemporary feel of this and the urban thing, I'm not minding it whatsoever. So I got those where I want. I'm going to jump down here to my next panel, which is the presence, which you can adjust your saturation, vibrance, and clarity. I always add a little bit of vibrance to my photos. The vibrance slider is a really great thing to add saturation to the images without affecting a lot of the skin tones. I believe that's what the original intent of it was designed for. I don't know. I'm not one of your Adobe TV professional guys, but I believe the vibrance slider adds a little bit of saturation to the tones of the image without affecting skin tones as much. So I'm going to bump that up to about 15. My contrast curve, I used to use this a lot going through, but now that I have these controls up here, I'm really haven't been touching it as much as I used to. I'm going to go down to my hue, saturation, and luminance. And if you notice, they got a little bit of red cheeks. It's because the wind was blowing, it was cold, they're trying to have fun, which they did. It was a really fun shoot. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the brightness or luminance value of the skin tones. So I'm going to make those red cheeks, those red noses go a little bit lighter and a little bit whiter. And so what that'll do is just kind of rid that. So what you can do is you can go ahead and grab your little tool here. And I don't know what the official name of this is. I'm just a normal guy. So, but you can go over here and drag it to what you want to brighten, and it will highlight for you. So these are the reds. But mostly, obviously, we can tell these are reds and oranges, maybe a little bit of yellow. So I'll go to my red slider here on my luminance. I'm going to bump it up just a little bit. I don't want to go too much. See, that'll kind of blow them out, but just a little bit, probably about, well, maybe plus 12 there. I'll also go below it to my orange because that's part of the skin tones, and kind of pull that out a little bit too. I'll go ahead and turn that off so you can kind of see the difference how that not only punches their skin just a little bit nicer, so it's a little bit more flattering to them, but it also gets rid of the redness of their cheeks just a little bit from that wind. While we're on the luminance pane, I like to go ahead and play with the gene colors and stuff. So I'll go down to like the colors of the blue and like that. So I can drop the color of her shirt. And I'll like make the jeans a little bit more blue and a little bit of the blues in it. So I'll drop the luminance of the aqua and the blue down a little bit. And as with any type of lomography curve or any type of crushing, we do a lot of split toning. You have your two sliders here, your highlights and your shadows. I rarely mess with the highlights too much because that'll start hitting skin tones, but as far as my shadows, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of a blue color to it so we can do a little bit of a cross process fill. So I'll go in here and start playing with these till I get it where I want. Let's see. Let's bump that. Oh, we'll go 238 for a good color, and then that's a little bit too, going a little bit to the magenta side. So we'll go ahead and drop the saturation of that more to the gray. About, we'll say 14. That looks pretty good. So you can see now it's kind of giving a little bit of a tone to it, a little bit cross. Now we'll go down to our sharpening, and whenever we edit an image, sharpening should be the last thing that you do. If there's one thing you can take from this entire video is that never sharpen things first. So since I'm going to be going into Photoshop with this image and coming back into Lightroom, I'm going to go ahead and just turn that sharpening all the way down to 0. I don't want to sharpen this image. There's nothing worse that'll degrade an image than over sharpening and adding contrast to the lines. You know, any crisp line in there is going to be contrasted. So noise reduction. Every digital camera has noise. With me, I was using a single light here, a 60-inch umbrella with an Elinchrom Ranger Quadra, and I was at ISO 200, actually ISO 160 on this image. So there's really not a lot of noise. However, every camera does have a little bit, so I always go to the darkest part of the image where I'm going to start seeing some of that noise, and I'll go ahead and turn it to 0. In fact, I'll go all the way into 3:1, and now you can actually see some of this chromatic noise here in the dark of the coat. So I'm going to go ahead and start ramping that up very slowly till where I think it's gone, probably about 10 there. So I didn't even need what the default value of 25 was. I'm less than half of that. Then I'll go to my luminance, which is normally at 0. However, my camera happens to have a little bit of lumatic noise. So I'm going to go ahead and bump that up just a little bit. Probably about 5. That's about fine. 5 and 10. Okay, working our way down. We can go do lens corrections if you want. They have automatic profiles, so you can go ahead and enable that, and that'll go ahead and fix it for you. However, shooting this with my camera, it had to do a little bit of pincushion distortion, which I actually like with this because it's a little bit more flattering to my subjects, so I'm going to go ahead and just leave that off. So lens corrections there. Now we're going to go down to my vignetting, and vignetting is one of those things, either you love it or you hate it. As a photographer, you know, some guys are so anti-vignetting and others love it. I'm a vignetter. I'm addicted to it. It's kind of my drug in photography. And so I always do a little bit of vignetting with my images. Just along the lines of we were previously talking about how our eye sees from luminance, from high contrast to low contrast first. This goes along with that. So I'll usually do a little vignette to bring the subject's eye to the viewer. And so I could use the setting here that comes with it, which is like an oval, and I can go ahead and I'll just overdo it here so you can see, and I can always change the, you know, going down to the roundness slider, I can always change the shape of it. And I'll do that. I'll bump roundness all the way so we're kind of seeing more of the door. But instead of using this, which makes you keep it in the center, and I was hoping with Lightroom 4 that they would have had more options to where I can actually move the focal point, or like where the center value is, where I could actually have a center pin to move it around, but they don't yet. So what I tend to do is, instead of using the actual vignette property, I'll scroll back up in my develop pane here and go ahead and click on the graduated filter, keyboard shortcut M. And I'll go ahead and do an exposure, you know, bump it down a half a stop, do whatever you want to do. And with me, I have a preset here because since I'm going to be going a little bit blue in the shadows, kind of that cross-process lomography curve. In Lightroom 4, they've now made it to where you can actually adjust the tint and the color temperature of your graduated filters, which is amazing because before they didn't have that and now they do, and so this has made my life a lot easier. So I'm just going to start dragging some of these in where I want them. And now I can create a custom vignette where the focal point will be wherever I want it to be instead of just being a circle like that you'd see in a box store or in a 1980s photograph. I'm going to go ahead and play at the exposure just a little bit. Okay, there's one there. I'm going to come do one on this side to kind of darken the sides. Like I said, if you don't like doing this, then don't, but I'm a vignetter, so I do it. Let's go ahead and drag one over the white paint that we see here. That was a little bit overpowering. There we go. That's looking pretty good. And then I'll do a third one just on top, just as if we were doing a sky filter. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and bring it a little bit lower. It's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to go up to the top here and drag that up so it's a little bit more feathered because I don't want this to be as prominent, and I'm going to go ahead and make it a little not quite as dark. There we go. So now you can see if I go before and after, you can see it's very subtle. It isn't like I'm, blackening the edges of the image. I'm just giving just a little bit of more, drawing a little bit more focus to the subjects. And there I'll go down to my actual vignette property down here, and I'll decide if I want to add just a little bit more to it, which I will. Okay, so now our image is ready to go into Photoshop to complete our post process. So here we go with the workflow. I'm going to right click on my image, being in the development pane, go to export. Actually, I'm not going to do export, pardon me, ignore that. Isynchronize is going to run a droplet. So go to edit in, and you can go to edit in Photoshop. And with me, so my Lightroom adjustments from my imported images, I edit the original raw NEF, or if you're Canon, the CR2 file. That's been edited. So now when I go to Lightroom, I'm going to select edit a copy of Lightroom adjustments. And down here is what I really want you to pay attention to, is that in the file format, instead of I do it in a TIFF file, because a TIFF is a nice uncompressed large file. I do it in the same color space that I shot in. My camera shot in sRGB, so I'm going to go ahead and edit in sRGB. My bit depth is going to be 16 bits instead of 8 because I like bigger. I like more of that range. And my resolution is 300. Default value will be 240, which is fine. And then under compression, I don't do any. I'm one of those guys as a cinematographer. My videos are twice as big, so a photo to me, a 60 megabyte photo is nothing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and click edit. It's going to go ahead and bring it up in Photoshop. And here's our image. So from there, I'm going to start doing my edits in Photoshop. And sometimes it gets extensive where I'm spending 5 to 10 minutes, and other times all I'm simply doing is a little bit of more color correction or a curve to it, and I'm done. So with this, there's a couple little things. So I'm going to duplicate my layer, Control or Command J. I'm going to go ahead and select my spot healing brush, J on the keyboard. And I'm going to go in here and just fix a couple little things here. Got a little dust there, even a hot pixel that showed up. And I'm just using the spot healing brush. So I'm going to go ahead and caress the image, kind of see if I got anything weird going on. I don't. It's going to be great. So go ahead and flatten my image. And now what I'm going to do is something that's kind of a trademark with me, is I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer, and that's how I do a lot of cross-processing and low-mo tones. And while we did a little bit of that in Lightroom, it didn't quite take it as far as I want to. That was kind of preparing the image and getting the default values of where I want, where the skin tones are neutral enough and the shadows are starting to go where I want them to. I now can bring it into Photoshop, which I've done, and actually add that. So up here on the upper right of the screen, you're going to see And this is CS5, by the way. We're going to go ahead and click Curves Adjustment Layer. It's going to bring that, and now I can start going in and playing with my curves to give it a look that I want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the red channel. I just work my way through. And I'm going to kind of drop my red values down just a little bit. See, if I do that, it's already starting to look, you know, kind of vintagey or cross-processed. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit. And I want to crush my blacks, which means I'm going to clip them. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the very bottom corner of the curves. I'm going to bring that bottom pin up just a little bit. From there, I'll go down to the blue channel. I'm skipping the green channel. Most of the time, you want to deal with red and blue, and then use green as your last adjustment to balance the whole image out. So we want to go red, blue, green. So now we're going to go into the blue slider. We're going to do the same thing. And obviously I'm lowering the blues here so you can see how it's pushing the one way. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the blues on this one. Kind of a backwards S curve. And that makes their lips blue. So I'm going to go up here where their skin tones would be. See the skin tones. I'm going to bring those back down. Just to give it a little bit more of what I want. I'm also going to crush them on this. Not extensively. Now pay attention to the shadows down there. Here, we'll zoom in a little bit. So if I crush those blacks, you see how it pushes them one way. And this gives you that nice editorial, fashion, cross-process, Polaroid, whatever you want to call it look that's so in right now. And has been consistent with my commercial clients as well as part of my branding and style. This is what I like to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put that there, bring it up a little bit. Now last, I've done my red, I've done my blue. I'm going to go ahead and go into my green channel and use the green kind of as the fulcrum to balance the rest of it. So I'm going to go ahead and play with this. Usually I go up to the top here where the skin tones would be a little bit more. And I'm paying attention to the lips. The lips is one of those things that will tend to go one way or the other. And all I did was just bump it up a little bit. That wasn't too bad. And I can crush this channel if I want, but I think I'm going to leave that down. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the layers so you can see the difference. Kind of balanced it out, got rid of some of those red tones, kind of gave it a nice little process tone there. And now that I've done red, blue, and green, I'm going to go up to my RGB channel, which is all of them. And I'm going to balance the overall contrast of the image with this when I'm done. So I'm going to add a little bit of contrast. So give it just a little bit of an S curve if I want to, or I'll even take out contrast to kind of crush it a little bit. This maybe just a small hair, and then I'll go to the very bottom again and crush the blacks again. And you can see if I go all the way up how you're clipping. So dragging that pin up to the top, just ever so, just a little bit. There we go. There's a before and there's an after. And here's the great thing is that, say like you want to do this again, you can go ahead and save this preset, which I highly recommend you do. So if you go up here to this pane up here where you have your adjustments, click on the little arrow with the little paragraph looking tool next to it, and you can go down and say Save Curves Preset. And then it will let you name it and save it, then it will be there, so next time you do a photo, you can just go ahead and apply the same setting to it. So, but I've actually saved a whole bunch of them. I've got probably about 50 of them here. And every time I do a shoot and I want to keep one of these, I'll go ahead and keep it. So I've already created one for this image. And we'll see how different it looks from what I just did. So that's the one I created before, and it's a little bit more red. So I actually like the one we just did. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that one. In fact, I'll try this one here. I call this Victorian Crush. And what's good is once you have these presets and you have them highlighted up here, you can go ahead and just cycle them. See, I'm just cycling things. These are ones I've done before. And you might find one that works really well for your image. And so don't be afraid to go ahead and just, you know, kind of cycle through, you know, something that works for you. And so and as you discover yourself and on your journey as a photographer and find out what you're liking and what your particular niche is and your branding and your style, you'll find something and probably stay with it. So So I have got the curve where I want it now. I had to pause there for a minute to make sure I could get back to the original one. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the little arrow up here. Go down to Save Curves Preset. And you'll see all my other ones I created. You can name it whatever you want. And this is one I've already done. And this is just going to be a temp one just for this set. So I'm going to go ahead and name it a temp curve just so I know it's a temp. Hit save. It's going to remember it. So there we go. And that's all I need to do to this image in Photoshop. And I'm not going to go in and do extensive, like, you know, changing eye colors or anything like that. Very minimal. Normally when I edit time on this would be less than 2-3 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten my image. I'm going to go ahead and save my image, Control or Command S, and close my image, Control or Command W. And from there I'm going to go back into Lightroom, and now I have my before Photoshop image where I had my Lightroom adjustments, and now I have my completed image. And for me, and there's a bunch of ways to do this in Lightroom, that you can rate your photos by how many stars you want to give them. You know, 1 through 5 stars. Me, I like the colors better because I can see a color a lot better than I can see a star. So I go ahead and name my original NEF image that isn't edited yellow, which is shortcut 7 on the keyboard. And then my final image, my TIFF image that I pulled into Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and make that green, and that's keyboard shortcut 8. So then I know which ones I've done. So then when I'm completed editing, all I have to do is go ahead and click the filter down here to make it so it only shows my green images. I can select all these and go ahead and export them to JPEG, DNG, or whatever format that my client prefers to have them in. So there's that. And for the last step of the image, we're going to go ahead and sharpen. And so, and every digital image needs a little bit of sharpening. This was shot at f3.5, so it is a little bit soft. But luckily, these ladies were all on the same focal length. They're all standing at the same distance, so it looks just fine. So, enable to sharpen. I'm going to go ahead to my sharpening window. And I go ahead and just start at the amount. And I started a good amount, around 25. Radius, anywhere between 1 and 1.4. Detail, I always just set it about 25 is fine. And then masking is how much it hides. And here's the secret with this, is to go ahead and if you hold the Alt key in any of these settings, it'll go ahead and put a mask over it or change the color of it so you can see what you're doing. So if I go to the radius slider, hold in Alt and grab the pin or grab the slider, I can go ahead and you can see how much you're sharpening. And when you're sharpening something, you don't want to go over and sharpen all the pores of the skin. All I want to sharpen is the lines. So here's my guideline for sharpening. Sharpen it as much as you can with getting away as with little as get away with as much as you can with sharpening as little as possible. And I know that's a little bit confusing, but what I'm saying is I want to sharpen the image without it appearing that it's been sharpened. So 1.4 might even be a little bit too much, so I'm going to bump it to 1.1. I'm going to go down to my detail slider here, go ahead and hold Alt, and this does the same thing. And the higher you drag this, the more detail it preserves. But again, if I drag this all the way to 100, you can see how it is kind of stifling or grabbing the pores of the skin. So I'm going to go ahead and start at 0 and slowly work my way up. And I'm one of those, I don't have a preset for sharpening. Because every image I shoot as far as that set of images is going to be a little different. So for all these images shot in front of this brick wall, I'm going to go ahead and, go ahead and sync them once I've done sharpened one. So there's that. And then masking goes ahead. I'm holding Alt and grabbing the masking tool, the same thing as before. Mask how much I'm seeing of that sharpening. So if I go to 0, you can see how it's still grabbing all that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and ramp that up to where I'm just seeing the outlines of everything. Maybe grab just a little bit more detail. Just a little bit more. All right, there we go. So And I always look for a good reference for sharpening. I always go to the eyes. And we'll zoom in all the way here to 3:1. And we'll go ahead and turn this off. Before, after. See, just subtle. It doesn't need to be overdone. And if you're doing HDR or something really boosty with clarity, that's fine. But just for a nice slight sharpening, that works really good. So in fact, we'll go ahead and bump the detail up just a little bit more. There you go. So this image is now done. So let's say like I've gone ahead and edited my images. Actually, we'll take a step back there. So now that I've sharpened this image, it's where I want it. I'm going to go ahead for this photo shoot. I'm going to go ahead and put my green filter so I have all my edited TIFF images. I'm going to go ahead and select all of them. Control Command A, or you can click them, whatever's easier. I'm going to go ahead and hit the sync button. And I'm going to check none of them, and all I'm going to check is sharpening. Now all it's going to do is just copy that sharpening setting that I just spent all that time working on this one. So doing that, there it just synced them. Go to the next one and we can check and see how it looks. Looks pretty good. And every scene's just a little bit different, so awesome. Perfect. So now that I'm done, let's pretend I'm done with this photo shoot, even though I've got more to edit. And I'm going to click all of them. Either you can go back, go back to your library pane. And you can either right click and do export if you're in the develop module, or if you go back to your library pane, you can go ahead and click export. So now here's what I do when I export them. I have individual folders set up for each of the images. And so when I first do a photo shoot, I create 4 or 5 different folders. I'll create my folder for my raw images that I import off my memory card from the camera. I'll create a folder that I titled Select, so when I go through and do my picks and my throwaways, which ones I'm actually going to edit, I'll go ahead and export them as an NEF image in their original format to this folder, and this is the folder I've been working in. So now that I'm done, I can go ahead and put them in. I can export them as my JPEGs. I can go ahead and export them with my watermark on them for internet publishing. And I'll go ahead for archival purposes and export them as a DNG, which I then put on a disk, which goes to a safety deposit box off-site in case my studio burns down, or office. So for this photo shoot's done, I'm going to go ahead and do my JPEGs, so I'm going to export them to that folder. I don't want to add this to the catalog because I already got copies of them as TIFFs. I don't need to rename them because I've already done that. I'm going to go ahead and select JPEG, 100% quality, 300 pixels per inch because that's my go-to. Make sure it's in the same color space. sRGB is what I shoot in. Everything's consistent. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit export. It's going to go ahead and export them. So those have exported. I'm going to do the same thing again for the next set, but this time I'm going to do my watermarks. So I'll go ahead and click my watermark folder, except I'm doing the same thing, JPEGs, full size, except under my watermark, I'm going to go ahead and pick my signature watermark that I always use. Export, it's going to do the same thing. And if you have any questions on this, I'm actually going to do a tutorial just on importing and kind of my workflow of how I organize my photos in my folders. So stay tuned for that if it's not already published. So that's export. Now I'm going to do my third one as my DNGs. Going to select my DNG folder. Now instead of doing JPEG, I'm going to collect DNG. I always select the newest camera raw for the presets. Export. Okay. Now I can go on to pictures, 2012, and here's all my folders with the ones I've done. So I've got my JPEGs, my DNGs, and my watermark. So whatever I'm giving my clients, I'll give them the JPEGs as well as the watermarked ones with copyright releases, and that's all depending on your business and what you do. For my master disk, which I burn on an archival quality, I go ahead and burn the DNGs, the JPEGs, the watermarks, and the selects of the TIFFs and the NES if I have room for them on a disk. That then goes to a safety deposit box. From there I can delete my DNGs because I don't need them. I can then delete my RAWs because I've already exported them to the select folder of the ones I wanted to pick. So I can always go ahead and just get rid of those. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and take my JPEGs and my watermark ones, this is my final outputted ones, and I'll go ahead and copy them to my external hard drives, which I have a Drobo enclosure, which I put that on 2 different drives there. So now I have it backed up on 2 different hard drives and a disk off-site. So that's pretty much my workflow in a bundle as far as how I edit, going back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop. Remember that we create 2 different folders in Lightroom. We have our raw images. From there we go through and make our picks and selections on which ones we want to actually edit. And from there we can go in and export them into a select folder, edit your selects, and then go ahead and export your selects again to another folder which consists of your JPEGs, and you can create another folder for watermark. So instead of having everything in one folder, I have everything in 5 different folders, so it's all nicely organized, and then nothing gets mixed up, nothing gets deleted, and if something gets deleted you always have copies of it somewhere else. So I hope you bared with me during this. I'm not much of a post-production tutorial guy, just a normal photographer just like you, making his way through the world, starving and eating ramen noodles. But if you have any questions, feel free to comment below, or you can email me at bigben@btsphotography.com. See more at my work at btsphotography.com. Again, this is Big Ben, and I bid you happy shooting.